This map you have before you here hides a very surprising fact about our actual true history. And that is what I will demonstrate to you here today. So this is a map of Ptolemy around the time of Christ, and it is one of the most influential maps of the ancient times. All the scholars after him copied his information and his understanding. So there are a few things we should notice. First, that the Black Sea is jutted way up in the northwest, right? All the way almost until the ends of the world, right? Over here is Scythia, the home of the Scythians. This is near the ends of the world. And it is placed besides Poland, right? And then, of course, you can see here that Scandinavia almost completely gone, right? All that's left is this small little island here called Scandza. And so Scandza is basically the name borrowed from Skåne, the most southern tip of the Scandinavian peninsula. So we will see what happened to the lands of Scandinavia, where they went. If we look at the world map of Ptolemy, you will see that this map is eastwardly exaggerated. I have talked about this map extensively in my first series, which you can watch if you want to have a more deep dive in this. In this presentation, I just want to show a very specific point, the most important one that turns our history on its head. So the Black Sea should be around here somewhere, but it has been moved up here to the northwest, besides Poland. Also, you can see here above the Black Sea, this is the Meotic, which is the gulf just above the Black Sea. You can see that it is connected to the Riphaean Mountains, and the Tanais is connected to it down into the Meotic. This is mistaken. There's no mountains connected to the Tanais River. The Scythian plain is a flatland, right? There's no mountains here, especially not the Riphaean Mountains. So we will now see what has happened here. You can see to the west, you have the Naski, and to the west of these mountains in Sweden, which have the same shape, you have the Norska, which is a transliteration. Naski is a transliteration of Norska, which is Swedish for Norwegian. And then you have to the southeast, Idre. That is, if you look to the southeast, Idra here. So that is, in modern times, called Idre. This is one of the most famous ski resorts today in Sweden. And then it is connected to the Tanais, right? And these mountains here, the Dover Mountains, are connected to the Tanais here, going down. So you have 4 coincidences of names, and several coincidences are no coincidence, as archaics like to say. What has happened is that he placed the central Sweden and moved it down to the north of the Black Sea. And this transplantation that Ptolemy did, it mirrors exactly what is said in the Ynglinga saga, which is one of the old Nordic sagas. And it says, northward of the Black Sea lies Svitjod the Great, and on the south side of the mountains, which lie outside of all the inhabited lands, so that is up in the north, runs a river through Svitjod, or Sweden, which is properly called by the name Tanais, and which falls into the Black Sea. So here again, you have Sweden being conflated with the area above the Black Sea, right? And this is the reason why Ptolemy feels that he needs to move the Black Sea northwest to basically become sort of underneath Scandinavia, right? Scandinavia juts to the east like this. So this is quite literally under Finland, right? Svitjod is Sweden, particularly central Sweden. And this is the exact area where you had the Riphaean Mountains. These are the exact ones. And one important thing about these is that they stretch 2 degrees, both of these mountains. These ones start at 62 and then at 64. And when you look at the one in Ptolemy's map, it stretches from 56 to 58. And the north-south direction is much more important than the east to west direction, because the north and south was the one they could more easily determine with precision, while the west to the east direction was very much a guesswork. Right? I've covered this in the whole presentation here I have in my first series. But of course, in the Ynglinga saga, modern scholars insist that Svitjod is supposed to be understood as Scythia Magna, so the area above the Black Sea, right? So they say that this Ynglinga saga conflates Sweden, especially central Sweden, with the area above the Black Sea, Scythia Magna. And it is the same conflation that Ptolemy makes. This mountain is the Dover Mountains in central Sweden, as I showed, right? And as it says, on the south side of the mountains which lie outside of all the inhabited lands, up in the north, that is why there's a Tanais in the north of Scandinavia as well. These are the original Riphaen Mountains, which I've shown several times, and will probably make a separate video on its own, just to be able to link it more easily. That is why Jordanes, in his Getica, which equates the Goths with the Scythians, that is why he says that the Goths went out of the Arctic island of Scandza. He said that they went from the Arctic region, which shows that the Tanais being talked about is not the one in central Sweden in their first exodus, but in this one in the furthest up north, in the cap of the north of Scandinavia. The same mighty sea has also in its Arctic region, that is in the north, a great island named Scandza. And then he says, now from this island of Scandza, as from a hive of races or a womb of nations, the Goths are said to have come forth long ago under the king Berig. And in search of suitable homes and pleasant places, they came to the land of Scythia. So here he means the Scythia above the Black Sea. That is one of the first places they went to. So this is why he moved the home of the Scythians north of the Black Sea, northwest, to bring it closer to Scandinavia, where they had their first exodus. It may not have been entirely conscious, but I see this as a kind of footprint of the real history, which, when not understood entirely, came out as these mistakes instead on his map. Namely, that Scandinavia was completely gone and was transplanted eastward instead. And if you look at the works of Adam of Bremen, you can see this imprint as well in how he drew Scandinavia. So you can see here that he juts everything to the east, connecting into Asia, right? Russia and Asia. And interestingly, he also calls the Baltic Sea the Scythian Sea. And now I'm going to show you specifically why he moved the Black Sea from here to specifically where he did, east of Poland. That is because of this little passage here in Pliny. It is because of there existing 2 Bugis, one lake and one river. And it says, this Bugis is separated by a ridge of rocks from Corytus, a gulf in the lake Meotis. So the modern scholar says that Bugis, this lake, is the Meotic, and it receives the river Bugis. There is a lake Bugis, which is the Meotic, and modern scholars, they say that the river has not been identified. But it is actually quite simple if you just keep your mind open to the fact that the Scythians may actually be European and not Asian, because if you do that, then it's quite easily observed that the Bugis River is, of course, the Bug River in Poland, right? This is the Bugis River, but it's in Europe. That's why they say that they can't identify the river, because they're under the impression that it has to be somewhere in Asia. So what Ptolemy did was move the Bugis Lake to the Bugis River to mirror what Pliny actually said was the geography. in practice removing Ukraine from corner to corner, right? He moved the Black Sea from one corner of Ukraine to the top corner of Ukraine, so that the Meotic was moved to Bugis besides Poland. That is why you see it besides Poland. Now, the Black Sea, or the Meotic, is received by the Bugis River, just as Pliny says. So it is quite undeniable, right, that this is what Ptolemy did on his map, to move the Black Sea northwest towards Scandinavia. And what is the consequence of this? It is that the Scythians being enumerated above the Black Sea land in Finland. And Johannes Magnus, one of the biggest Gothicist historians, he said in History of All the Kings of the Geats and Swedes that Magog, the king of the Scythians, had its first rule in Finland. And Finland can also be the cap of the north here, right? Where the first Tanais River is, the Arctic island of Scandza in Jordanus, right? This can also be Finland. So the Gothicist history as an imprint in Ptolemy's map can be seen by two merges that it picks up from different sources. First one we saw here now, the Pliny one, where he merges the Bugis lake with the Bugis river. And then in the Ynglinga saga, where it says that Svitjod the Great has Tanais flowing into the Black Sea, merging the central Sweden of Svitjod with the area above the Black Sea. So that is why I ask, is it a coincidence that these two areas, the area above the Black Sea being Ukraine, has the same color as Sweden? I don't know. Could be a coincidence, but considering that this might be a possibility, right? Maybe it's not a coincidence. So this finding that I made, that the Bugis Lake was moved up to the Bugis River. This was a finding I made because I took this work seriously. The Atlantica, which is a work you've probably never heard of if you haven't followed my channel, it is a work by Olaf Rudbeck, who wrote it in the 1600s, and has been basically all but forgotten today. There's no translations of it in English. And that is one of my projects, to make this available for you to read for yourself, to see what he actually wrote. A lot of this material comes from this work. And he is one of the proponents of the shorter timeline, not this 9,000 years before Solon, as I covered in my previous video, where I also connected it to Archaics research. And he is more outspoken that this is the only one that makes sense, the 1400 BC mark for the march of the Atlanteans, not 9,000 years before Solon, counting them as moon years, right? Not sun years. And the very interesting thing about that is Atlantis has 9,000 moon years, lands at 1400 BC. And this is exactly the same time as the Goths went out of Scandza, according to Jordanus. And also Albert Krantz in Nordic kingdoms, and Johannes Magnus, as I said, one of the largest Gothicist historians. He said the same thing. Are these the same dates because these talk about the same event? Could be, right? That is all for this time. Next time I will do a short presentation trying to cover everything in about 5 minutes. Thank you for this time, and I will see you soon.